In the world of sports, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat are what keep us on the edge of our seats. But what happens when the integrity of the game is compromised? From match fixing to insider betting, nearly every professional sport has been tarnished by a betting scandal. And in today's video, we're going to cover some of the wildest stories of greed, addiction, and downfall that have shocked sports fans around the world. In April 2024, Jontay Porter was handed a lifetime ban from the NBA after he placed bets on himself to underperform on a basketball court and shared confidential information to bettors. Porter signed with the Toronto Raptors in December 2023, but was far from being a household name, which might have been why he felt he could slip under the radar and get away with illegal betting. Porter had developed a gambling addiction while in college and shilled crypto and gave stock trading advice. Then started using his friend's online gambling account to wager on NBA games. States across America began legalizing sports betting in 2018, but NBA players and employees are strictly not allowed to bet on anything related to the NBA or any of its properties. On the 26th of January, during a game against the LA Clippers, Porter subbed off after just 4 minutes, claiming he had an eye injury. His statistics for points scored, rebounds, and assists naturally fell significantly below sportsbooks' expectations, but eyebrows were raised when player prop bets on him were among the biggest money winners for bettors that day, since Porter was a fairly obscure player. On the 20th of March, during a game against Sacramento, Porter again prematurely exited just 3 minutes in, complaining of illness. This time, DraftKings and another unnamed sportsbook sounded the alarm after detecting an unusual amount of betting action on Porter's under statistics that day. In particular, there was an $80,000 wager that would have paid out $1.1 million. But the suspicious bet was frozen and an investigation was launched. Although it was determined that Porter never bet on any games he played in, he had used his friend's online gambling accounts to bet on at least 13 NBA games, including 3 occasions when he bet on his own team to lose. He had also shared information about his health status to bettors and directly colluded with a small gambling syndicate in an effort to pay off his own debts. He tipped off 4 others that he would withdraw early from the games on the 26th of January and the 20th of March, and as a result, performed significantly below what bookies projected. Porter's co-conspirators placed large bets on his unders and agreed to pay him a share of the winnings. 24-year-old Jontay Porter pleaded guilty to unspecified federal felony charges, while 4 others were charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Porter's NBA salary was about $410,000, but that was expected to rise to $2 million if he was signed by the Raptors for another season. Of course, that won't be happening, and instead, Porter is now facing a maximum prison sentence of 20 years. In 2013, 18-year-old Shohei Ohtani met 29-year-old Ippei Mizuhara, a Japanese-born American-educated interpreter for the Hokkaido Nippon Ham Fighters baseball team. Ohtani was a rookie at the time, but he was a rising star, and a few years later, he made the leap to Major League Baseball and was signed with the Los Angeles Angels. He brought Mizuhara with him to the United States to work as his personal interpreter. Ohtani relied on Mizuhara not only to overcome the language barrier, but to run errands, help him with admin tasks, and drive him around until he got his license. Mizuhara also helped Ohtani open his American bank account in which his Angels' salary would be deposited. In September 2021, Ippei Mizuhara met bookmaker Matthew Boyer at a poker game in San Diego. Boyer set Mizuhara up with an account on an illegal sports betting website, as sports betting is still illegal in the state of California. Over the next few years, Mizuhara was hit hard by gambling losses and constantly had to increase his line of credit with the bookies, sending him into a debt of over $4 million. Meanwhile, Shohei Ohtani had ascended to superstar status, and in December 2023, he signed a record-breaking $700 million 10-year contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Ippei Mizuhara was also hired by the Dodgers as Ohtani's personal interpreter. Ohtani still relied heavily on Mizuhara to communicate as well as handle many general admin tasks. It was also around this time that Matthew Boyer and a wider California-based gambling ring was being investigated by federal authorities. In early 2024, reporters from the LA Times and ESPN received tips that the investigation found 2 wire transfers totaling $1 million sent from Ohtani's bank account to Boyer. On the 18th of March 2024, Ohtani's agent was notified and his camp went into crisis mode. Ohtani's camp allowed his interpreter, Ippei Mizuhara, to give an interview to ESPN. Mizuhara admitted that he had a gambling problem and had turned to his friend, baseball megastar Shohei Ohtani, to front him $4.5 million to cover his massive debts. He made it clear that Ohtani himself had never been involved in gambling. Later that evening, on the 20th of March, the Dodgers played against the San Diego Padres in Seoul, South Korea. Ohtani had 2 hits and was seen chatting with Mizuhara in the dugout. After the game, Dodgers owner Mark Walter called a meeting with the players in the clubhouse and warned them that a negative news story was about to come out. Mizuhara addressed the team and told them about his gambling problem and how Ohtani had helped him cover his debts. ESPN and the LA Times were hours away from hitting publish when Ohtani's spokesperson suddenly denied Mizuhara's story. Apparently, on the way back to the hotel following the clubhouse meeting, Ohtani started asking questions about what was going on. This whole time, Mizuhara had still been serving as his interpreter, and it seemed that he had been withholding some crucial facts. Ohtani told his people that he had no knowledge of his interpreter's gambling addiction and had not given him any money to cover his debts. Ohtani was shocked to learn that a huge sum of money was missing from his bank account. The Dodgers immediately fired Ippei Mizuhara, and the IRS launched an investigation. Ohtani's spokesperson told news outlets that Mizuhara had lied, and the truth was he had stolen millions from Ohtani. Baseball fans began to speculate. Was Shohei Ohtani in on it, and was the sudden change of the story so Mizuhara could take the fall? It seemed unlikely. Firstly, Ohtani deferred 97% of his $700 million contract. A degenerate gambler would probably want to get their hands on as much money as they could to feed their addiction. Then there was Mizuhara's track record for bending the truth. In the wake of this scandal, news outlets dug deeper into Mizuhara's past and found that he had lied about graduating from the University of California, Riverside, then also lied about working for the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees. It's possible that Ohtani did knowingly gift his friend the $4.5 million to cover the illegal gambling debts, not realizing how illegal that was in itself. But it doesn't change the fact that he was taken advantage of and manipulated by his trusted friend who he had known since he was 18. On the 11th of April 2024, Ippei Mizuhara was charged with bank fraud for allegedly stealing more than $16 million from Shohei Ohtani. Mizuhara pleaded guilty and now faces a maximum sentence of 33 years in prison, 5 years of supervised release, and a fine of $1.25 million. On the 4th of June, the MLB concluded their investigation and cleared their golden goose Shohei Ohtani of any wrongdoing. Oddly enough, on that same day, the MLB handed out a lifetime ban to 24-year-old Tucupita Marcano, a player on the San Diego Padres, for making nearly 400 bets on baseball, including on his own team. 4 other players were given 1-year suspensions as they had not made anywhere near as many bets. Plus, they never bet on any games they were a part of. We couldn't talk about baseball betting scandals without mentioning the Black Sox, a notorious game-fixing scandal that involved 8 members of the Chicago White Sox deliberately losing the 1919 World Series. Many of the players had been feeling a deep resentment towards their team owner, Charles Comiskey, and tensions were high over pay disputes. The conspiracy to throw the World Series began with a single player being approached by a bookie, and the plot grew as more players were incentivized by the $80,000 payout. However, the gamblers failed to make the promised payments, leading to a temporary double-cross by the players, who ended up winning games 6 and 7. Eventually, threats of violence forced them back into the fix, culminating in their loss in Game 8. The scandal broke wide open in 1920, leading to a grand jury investigation and high-profile trial. All 8 players were acquitted but were banned from baseball for life. 70 years later, Pete Rose, the all-time MLB hit leader, accepted a lifetime ban from baseball for betting on his own team. After Rose, who was a manager of the Cincinnati Reds at the time, was hit with the gambling accusations, he sued the MLB. He agreed to drop the lawsuit and accept the ban in exchange for the MLB not officially concluding whether or not he bet on games, although there was enough evidence to show he did. He has applied for reinstatement several times over the years, but the ban has been upheld, meaning he won't ever be eligible for Hall of Fame induction. In his 2004 memoir, Rose admitted to betting on baseball, including on his own games, while playing for and managing the Cincinnati Reds, and later stated in a radio interview, "I bet on my team to win every night because I loved my team. I believed in my team." Now let's leave the world of baseball behind and go back to basketball.
Hello. Carmine Lupatazzi. He passed during the night. My cousin told me it was Carmine who invented point shaving.
CCNY versus Kentucky, 1951. Nobody beat the spread. I bought a black Fleetwood.
Point shaving is when a player deliberately limits the number of points scored by their own team, so the final score stays within a certain range, usually below the point difference predicted by bookmakers. It's a form of match fixing, but players don't necessarily need to lose the game to earn their bribe or share of the winnings, so it feels less damaging to participate. Up until early 2024, American college basketball players were not paid a salary, making them easy targets for illegal gambling rings and organized crime. The 1951 game referred to in The Sopranos was part of a real point shaving scandal. It involved 7 schools, but the key players of each scandal were from the star-studded CCNY City College New York team, which made history in 1950 for winning both the National Invitation and the NCAA tournaments. Players had been accepting bribes from the mafia to point shave, and the scheme eventually spread to other schools. In total, 32 players were involved and 86 games were fixed. Dozens of players and bookies were arrested and charged, with many of them receiving bans from the NBA, while 2 players even served prison time. One of the players who was involved in the scandal but didn't get caught was Jack Molinas of Columbia University. He went on to play for the Fort Wayne Pistons in the NBA, but was eventually banned for life after it was discovered that he had bet on his own NBA games and turned out to have been one of the ringleaders in the 1951 scandal. He got his law degree, was admitted to the New York bar, then got busy masterminding an even more expansive college point shaving scheme. With the help of deeper mafia ties, Molinas' gambling syndicate was able to bribe many more players from 22 colleges, controlling hundreds of games between 1957 and 1961. The scandal came to light when bribery attempts on college football players failed, eventually leading to the arrests of Jack Molinas and other key figures, as well as 37 players, while 50 individuals were banned from the NBA. Jack served 5 years in prison, then in 1975 was shot dead in his own backyard in a suspected mob-related murder. In 1978, dog groomer Paul Mazzi and his friend, school librarian Tony Perla, hatched up a plan to fix some Boston College basketball games. They were small-time gamblers and drug dealers who saw an opportunity to make a quick buck because Tony's brother Rocco was friends with a player on the team, Rick Kuhn, while Paul knew Henry Hill of the Lucchese crime family in New York. You might recognize the name Henry Hill from the film Goodfellas. In the movie, Henry Hill makes a few references to his Pittsburgh guys. Those guys were Paul Mazzi and the Perla brothers. Mobster Jimmy Burke bankrolled the scheme and set up a network of bookies. Rick Kuhn agreed to point shaving, then roped in 2 of his teammates. Threats from the mob kept the 3 college kids in line, but after losing money, the gang decided the scheme was too unreliable and abandoned it. Henry Hill was arrested in April 1980 on drug charges and flipped and became a government informant, testifying against his mafia associates, which led to 50 convictions. He later entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. The 1978 Boston College point shaving scheme only made Hill about $100,000 and only came to light because he confessed to prosecutors about it. Jimmy Burke was sentenced to 12 years prison, Paul Mazzi and Tony Perla 10 years, Rocco got 4 years, and Rick Kuhn had his 10 years reduced to 28 months. In September 2007, the New York Post reported that the FBI was investigating an NBA referee for betting on basketball games, including ones he had officiated, as well as providing insider information to gamblers in exchange for money. The scandal exploded when it was revealed that the referee in question was respected 13-year veteran Tim Donaghy. Donaghy had been a gambler for years. Although the NBA forbade any of their refs from any gambling aside from horse racing, Donaghy was a regular at the Borgata Casino in Atlantic City. In 2003, he began to wager on NBA games with his golf buddy and bookie Pete Ruggieri. He started off with small bets on only 3 games in that first season. But season after season, his betting volume increased. And since he had an enormous amount of insider knowledge, his bets were usually successful. Jimmy Batista, an acquaintance of Donaghy's who attended the same high school as him, caught wind of the ref's illegal bets. Batista wasn't a gambler or bookmaker. He was known as a mover, an underground bet broker who placed wagers on behalf of his clients. Without Donaghy's knowledge, Batista started placing bets based on Donaghy's picks, and soon enough was running what was essentially an unauthorized hedge fund. In December 2006, Batista met up with Donaghy and demanded they work together directly. Too many people were following Donaghy's bets now, so they needed to control the information leaking out to avoid raising suspicion. Around this time, the FBI had received a tip from one of their informants that an NBA referee was in cahoots with an underground gambling ring connected to the Gambino crime family. In March 2007, Batista checked into drug rehab and had Pete Ruggieri temporarily take over his operation. Ruggieri was irate when he realized that Batista had gotten greedy and was accepting far too many large bets and was causing the betting lines to noticeably swing. Ruggieri quickly shut the whole thing down, and a few weeks later, Batista, fresh out of rehab, got a knock on his door from the FBI. On the 15th of June, Tim Donaghy showed up at the US Attorney's Office in Brooklyn and gave a full statement about the whole operation. He admitted to all the illegal betting, but fervently denied ever fixing a game. He claimed that even though he bet on games he was officiating, it didn't affect his calls on the court. He also told the feds that he wasn't the only referee in the league who gambled. Before the FBI could wire up Donaghy and launch a full-blown investigation into the NBA, the New York Post report came out. NBA Commissioner David Stern addressed the media and asserted that Tim Donaghy acted alone, and that there was absolutely no match fixing going on. He said, as a matter of his on-court performance, he is in the top tier of accuracy. The NBA hired a third-party law firm to investigate and found that Donaghy had not tried to influence the outcome of any games he had money on, and that became the official stance. However, that conclusion was based on analysis of only 17 games that Donaghy admitted to betting on. In 2019, ESPN conducted their own review of all 40 games officiated by Donaghy during the time he was working with Batista and found that his foul calls favored the team that attracted heavier betting 77% of the time. In August 2007, Donaghy pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to transmit gambling information. He was sentenced to 15 months in prison and had to pay millions in fines, fees, and reimbursements to the NBA. Donaghy has still never publicly confessed to deliberately manipulating games, although several reports suggest that he has privately admitted to it. There are many more incredible and insane details to the Tim Donaghy scandal, so let us know in the comments if you'd like a full video on the story. Star quarterback Art Schlichter's promising career was also quickly derailed by his unchecked gambling addiction. During college, he was the golden boy of Ohio State University. Not only was he the quarterback, but he also played basketball, had the good looks, and the wholesome All-American image too. Only his closest inner circle knew that he had gotten hooked on the thrill of the racetrack and had started betting on other sports, including college sports. In 1982, Schlichter was drafted into the NFL, but by the end of the year, he had blown his entire $350,000 signing bonus and racked up $700,000 in gambling debts. By March 1983, he had lost almost $500,000 and at that point went to the NFL and FBI for help, fearing bookie threats. As a result, he was suspended by the NFL indefinitely. After stints in other leagues and a brief return to the NFL, Schlichter's football career came to an end in 1986 due to his rampant gambling problem. His life continued to spiral downward. He had to declare bankruptcy, was constantly lying to his loved ones, stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from friends and strangers, and passed bad checks, leading to multiple arrests and imprisonments. In 1998, his wife Mitzi divorced him after he stole from her and broke multiple promises to stop gambling. His addiction was so severe that in 2004, he was caught gambling in prison, landing himself in solitary confinement for 100 days. After getting out of prison, Schlichter founded a non-profit to educate others, particularly college and NFL players, about the dangers of gambling. He publicly opposed casinos being brought to certain cities in Ohio and got a job hosting his own radio show. Although it appeared he had cleaned up his act, in reality, he was still gambling. In 2009, he reunited with Anita Barney, the widow of a former Wendy's CEO. They had met back when he was in college in 1981. Anita saw him as a hero who had helped save the life of her injured son. They were in a romantic relationship for 2 years until 2011, when she discovered that Schlichter had stolen over $1 million from her. Further theft, fraud, and drug charges landed him in prison twice more over the following years. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and dementia, likely caused by repeated concussions, and continued to battle his demons over the next several years. Most recently, in February 2024, Schlichter was arrested and charged with drug possession. The full story of Schlichter's downfall is as fascinating as it is tragic, so let us know in the comments if you want a full video. James Krause made a name for himself as a mixed martial artist, competing in small organizations before getting signed to the biggest promotion in the world, the UFC, in 2013. He was a solid fighter and opened up his own MMA gym and began coaching. However, in August 2022, he announced on the MMA Hour podcast that he would not be fighting again. On that same podcast episode, Krause spoke about how he was earning more money betting on UFC fights than he ever did as a fighter or coach. He explained that he had a paid Discord server called the 1% Club with over 2,000 members. He bet on nearly every single fight, and his predictions were usually successful due to his close proximity to many of the other fighters and coaches in the UFC. All of this was above board. Unlike other major sporting organizations, the UFC didn't have any rules in place regarding internal betting. But a couple of months later, the UFC announced an update to its athlete code of conduct and prohibited fighters, coaches, and any other personnel who might have insider information, including family members, from betting on UFC fights. Not all fighters were happy about this decision, but obviously, it made sense. On the 5th of November 2022, in the hours leading up to a UFC fight night, there was an unusually large fluctuation in the betting lines for the featherweight bout between Darrick Minner and Shaileann Nordenbecker. A flood of wagers were placed on Nordenbecker to win in an early technical knockout, shifting him from a -220 favorite to a -420 favorite. Sure enough, Nordenbecker went on to defeat Darrick Minner in just 67 seconds by a TKO, due to Minner appearing to sustain a leg injury. In Darrick Minner's corner was none other than James Krause. It was later revealed that Minner had an undisclosed knee injury prior to the fight. Put 2 and 2 together, and it's no surprise that independent gambling watchdog US Integrity launched an investigation. The UFC were quick to announce they were also conducting a thorough review, and the organization's president, Dana White, downplayed the matter. Meanwhile, the 1% Club Discord server quietly disappeared. In December, gaming commissions in Ontario and Alberta, Canada, banned gambling on UFC fights due to concerns of insider betting and fight fixing. The Nevada Athletic Commission banned Krause and Minner, and shortly after, the UFC banned any fighters who chose to continue to associate with James Krause. Dana White flipped on his original stance and told ESPN that fight fixing was a huge concern, and warned fighters that federal prison would be the punishment for anyone caught breaking the betting rules. James Krause had to sell his stake in his own gym, and references about his coaching were scrubbed from the UFC's official social media. Although official investigations are still ongoing, in January 2023, ESPN reported that James Krause had been working as a middleman between bettors and offshore bookies based in Antigua and Barbuda. In March 2024, Krause resurfaced on Facebook with a low-res photo of an empty house, suggesting he was now peddling real estate investing advice. Let's leave America now and examine some other sports betting scandals in other parts of the world. In August 1997, the inaugural football or soccer game at Pride Park Stadium in England between Derby County and Wimbledon ended 11 minutes into the second half after the floodlights suddenly went out and the game had to be abandoned. In November 1997, the lights at Upton Park Stadium in London went out during the match between West Ham United and Crystal Palace. Frank Lampard had just scored an equaliser in the second half, and while he celebrated, the entire ground was suddenly plunged into darkness, forcing the abandonment of the game. A month later, the same thing happened 13 seconds into the second half at Selhurst Park Stadium during Wimbledon vs Arsenal. Do you see a pattern forming? In February 1999, a few days before a Charlton vs Liverpool game at the Valley Stadium, local police received a tip from a friend of a Charlton Athletic security guard. The security guard, Roger Firth, had divulged to his mate that he had been bribed to trip the stadium's electronics using a remote control when the score was a tie. The police staked out the stadium, then pounced when a BMW pulled up. They arrested 2 men from Malaysia, 1 man from Hong Kong, and security guard Roger Firth. The men were part of an illegal gambling syndicate all the way in Asia. The local football tournaments there had been corrupted by match fixing, so punters and bookies had turned their sights to the Premier League. Under their dodgy underground rules, bookies paid out or collected if matches were abandoned in the second half, and so the light failure scheme was born. In 2000, South African cricket hero Hansie Cronje's downfall came when he was exposed for accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars from underground bookies to share insider information as well as to fix games. Cronje, 3 teammates, and 2 bookies were arrested. Cronje was also found to have over 70 undeclared offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. However, South African authorities dropped the investigation after he was killed in a plane crash in 2002, aged 32. Despite his admission of guilt and subsequent lifetime ban, Cronje was voted the 11th greatest South African in 2004. Tennis is a sport particularly vulnerable to match fixing. There are 60,000 professional tennis matches played around the world every year, and lower-level pros don't win the huge money prizes seen in the top levels, making these players easy targets for gambling rings. The most notorious controversy came in 2007 at the Sopot Open in Poland. The world number 4 ranked Davydenko from Russia was up against number 87 Martin Visajo Arguello from Argentina. Davydenko should have been able to secure an easy victory, but before the first ball was even served, alarm bells went off at the Betfair gambling exchange in London after thousands of pounds were wagered on the Argentine to win. In total, £3.6 million were wagered on the game, which was 10 times more than the usual volume of cash for a minor tournament, with most of the bets coming from 9 accounts registered to users in Moscow. In the third set of the match, Davydenko forfeited due to injury. Betfair voided all bets on the match and reported the situation to the ATP. An investigation was launched, but both Davydenko and Arguello were cleared of any wrongdoing. The ATP would brush off several more instances of suspected match fixing in later years, but rumours of lower-ranked players in small tournaments tanking their matches continued to swirl. In 2016, the tennis world was rocked by a potential match-fixing scandal after the BBC and BuzzFeed News jointly reported that a core group of 16 unnamed prominent tennis players were involved in a widespread match-fixing scheme. Among this group were Grand Slam title holders who had lost games when suspicious bets had been placed against them. In response to the bombshell, a few players, including world number 1 Novak Djokovic, came out and confirmed that they had been approached in the past to fix games. Roger Federer called for names to be named, while Leighton Hewitt went on the defensive after his name was brought up as one of the alleged fixers. Just days after the report was published, the Australian Open commenced, and a mixed doubles match immediately aroused suspicion. An unusually large number of bets were placed on the minor match, resulting in 20 different online bookies cancelling all bets on that match. All 4 players were cleared of any wrongdoing by the Tennis Integrity Unit. Let's stay in Australia now and cover what I would argue is the worst betting scandal of all time, with the victim count in the millions. And that's Australia's decades-long state-sanctioned gambling problem. Legal sports betting is still fairly new in the States, but us Aussies have been legally betting on sports since the 80s. The first non-government betting company, Sportsbet, obtained its license in 1993, and our first online sports betting website, CenterBet, launched in 1996. And if you want to make an in-person wager, you're never too far away from a TAB, the Totalisator Agency Board, which originally started out as a state government betting agency. More people than ever, including teenagers in school, are betting on sports thanks to mobile apps and relentless and pervasive advertising. Major sporting leagues like the AFL and NRL are sponsored by online gambling companies and also take a cut of bets, although recently, some individual clubs have been severing ties with betting sponsors. Footy players have even started to receive training on how to deal with abusive messages from punters who lost money. It's pretty common knowledge here that in the AFL, by far the most popular sport in Australia, there are very strict rules when it comes to internal gambling. Players are prohibited from gambling on anything to do with footy, as well as from sharing any information that could influence gambling decisions. The rules extend to all AFL staff. An office worker isn't allowed to be a part of a family tipping competition, and even non-monetary wagers like a cup of coffee cannot be made with a friend. Yet that didn't stop 20-year-old Jaden Stevenson of the Collingwood Footy Club from placing 3 bets totaling $36, all on his own team on games he played in that all ended up being unsuccessful. He accidentally dobbed on himself when he absent-mindedly mentioned to a senior teammate in the change room how another one of their teammates had cost him his multi. Stevenson was advised to self-report to the AFL at once. He was hit with a 10-match suspension and $20,000 fine. Gold Coast's Reece Nichols similarly received a 2-match ban and $5,000 fine for making 10 bets, all unsuccessful, totaling $256. In 2022, the AFL was hit with a betting scandal that took place not on the field, but at the league's glamorous annual award night. The prestigious Brownlow medal is awarded to the best and fairest player of the season and is determined by votes cast by field umpires after each game throughout the season. During the awards ceremony, the votes are delivered in a locked briefcase in what can only be described as quintessentially daggy Australian fashion. The votes are counted live, and yes, you can bet on who will win. That year though, betting agencies detected unusual activity around the Brownlow and reported it to the AFL. A few weeks later, 4 men, including respected AFL umpire Michael Pell, were arrested and had their phones and other devices seized. Pell was sacked for allegedly leaking information about the Brownlow medal votes. He adamantly denied the allegations and is still yet to be charged with a crime. Let's finish off at the Brisbane racetracks in 1984, where one of the most bizarre and infamous scandals in Australian sporting history occurred. 8-year-old Fine Cotton was a pretty bad racehorse. He was only eligible for restricted races for horses with a low number of wins, and even then, performed quite poorly. This gave former Bloodstock agent John Gillespie an idea to try to pull off a ring-in or horse substitution scam. At this point, Gillespie already had 300 convictions to his name and had a reputation for being a con man. A ring-in scam is straightforward. A slow horse is entered into a race where the odds are high. You put money on it, then at the last minute, swap in a much faster horse who looks like your slow horse. The fast horse wins and you win a lot of money. Gillespie planned to substitute Fine Cotton for the younger and faster Dashing Solitaire. They're about the same size and were both a deep chocolate color. Gillespie hired a legitimate trainer to train Dashing Solitaire to make sure he would win. However, just a few days before the race, poor Dashing Solitaire had cut his leg open on a barbed wire fence. Gillespie scrambled to find another horse for sale nearby and managed to secure Bold Personality for $20,000. Only problem was, Bold Personality looked nothing like Fine Cotton. He was light brown with no white markings. Then on the drive to Gillespie's stables, Bold Personality overheated and became dehydrated in the Queensland heat. In an effort to rehydrate Bold Personality, one of Gillespie's bumbling accomplices accidentally ruptured one of the horse's blood vessels, causing him to start bleeding. As if this poor horse's ordeal wasn't enough, Gillespie and co. then decided to disguise Bold Personality by applying dark brown box hair dye all over his body. However, when the dye washed out, Bold Personality wasn't a deep chocolate brown, but instead bright red. They quickly shampooed the horse to wash all the dye out and spray painted his feet white to make him look more like Fine Cotton. The gang dashed to the Eagle Farm racecourse, barely making it in time for the race. Fine Cotton's odds that morning were 33-1, but over the course of the day, the odds plummeted. Wagers were coming in from all over Australia and even from Fiji and New Guinea. Bill Waterhouse and his son Rob, who is still one of the most prominent bookies in the country today, got involved and fine cotton became the worst kept secret in racing, with his odds falling to 7-2. Officials were highly suspicious, but incredibly, Fine Cotton, actually Bold Personality, was cleared to race, then went on to win as planned.
Fine Cotton's going to hold on, I think. Oh, he's just in front. Oh, he may have won by a nose. There's nothing in it. This has one Fine Cotton the bookmakers won't be able to pay.
Except white paint had run off the horse's feet and spectators began to chant, "Ring in." Even more unbelievable, Bold Personality's former owner just happened to be at the track that day and instantly recognized his horse. Fine Cotton was disqualified a few minutes later and all bets were cancelled. John Gillespie and his crew hightailed it out of there, but were eventually tracked down and arrested, while the jockey, who wasn't aware of the scam, was let off. Gillespie was given 4 years in prison, and Bill and Rob Waterhouse had their bookmaking licenses revoked but were reinstated in 1998. As for the horses in this story, the real Fine Cotton lived to the ripe old age of 32, Dashing Solitaire's leg injury was looked after by his trainer, and Bold Personality never had to race again after his day in disguise.